Well, greetings to everyone and welcome to the SEALOCK webinar series this week, where we're going to be discussing our SmartFeed systems for controlling individual feed intake. My name is Ted Cunningham and I'm manager for Beef Systems and Solutions for SEALOCK Incorporated. And I'll be your presenter for today. And on behalf of all of our team at SEALOCK Inc., we want to thank you for joining us and welcome you to today's webinar series. Just kind of before we begin, I do want to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. We do want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded today and that the recording, as well as the slides and recordings from our past webinar series on green feed in April, are available by contacting Carla Roseanne. Her email there is listed, kroseanne@sealockinc.com, or feel free to contact us using the contact@sealockinc.com email address as well. Also, want to let you know we do welcome your questions. However, probably the easiest way for you to ask those questions is to use the chat box as part of the GoToWebinar feature. For those of you who might be joining us from a phone line today, feel free to email those questions at contact@sealockinc.com. We'll be trying to address all of your questions at the end of today's webinar. Did want to make sure you were aware of our recently released SEALOCK equipment grant opportunity. And this grant will be for up to $100,000 in SEALOCK equipment. We'll be accepting proposals that are 3 to 5 pages in length. They'll be due by June the 12th. This grant will be for equipment only and will be eligible for projects up to 3 years in duration. Purpose is really to research and identify methods to improve efficiency, productivity, as well as sustainability using our technology from here at SEALOCK Incorporated. A really important consideration that you need to keep in mind is that we're going to be looking for research proposals that have a focus on new management methods or system application. And so ultimately, we're going to be looking for proposals that have the potential, research that has the potential of providing a really strong return on investment for the commercial or industry or producer sector of our business. Greatly encourage creativity and innovation with this proposal process. If you have any questions or like more information about this grant, please again contact us at contact@sealockinc.com. Also want to remind you that next week's webinar on May the 20th at 9 a.m. Central, we'll be discussing our SmartFeed and SmartScale system. Our SmartFeed system is used to measure daily feed intake on an individual basis. And like the systems that we're talking about today, is wireless, it's portable and modular. And then we'll also talk about our SmartScale system for capturing individual animal weight, performance, as well as behavior each time an animal goes to water. So if you've not already signed up for this webinar that's coming up next week, please make sure and do so. For this webinar series, we've decided to use some polling to engage you, the audience, and give us a little bit of feedback. So these polls are completely voluntary, but we greatly appreciate your participation. This first poll will really just ask a quick question to help us understand a little bit more about this morning's audience and your familiarity with SmartFeed systems to control intake. So one of our panelists, Mike Billers, is going to put the poll up and then ask, how familiar are you with SEALOCK Incorporated's technology to control individual feed intake with our SmartFeed Pro or Super SmartFeed? So give Mike a moment and give you a moment or two to finish answering that question.
Okay, with about 50% voted, I'll leave it open for just a little bit longer here. Okay, looks like we have about 5% of our attendees have never heard of it, 33% have heard of it and are a little familiar, 38% are somewhat familiar and visited the website or a trade show, and 23% have been involved using SmartFeed.
Great. Well, it sounds like we have a great mix of in the audience today across the spectrum of folks that are maybe just learning and becoming familiar, all the way up to a group of folks in the audience that have used or been involved with research with our SmartFeed Pro and SmartFeed systems for controlling intake. We wanted to start today's webinar with just a really brief and quick history and overview of Seedstock Incorporated. And Seedstock was founded by Dr. Patrick Zimmerman in 2005, and Dr. Zimmerman really spent a career in atmospheric sciences and atmospheric chemistry research. He devoted a lot of his research efforts to developing carbon and emission measurement systems, which ultimately have led to the development of the system that we call GreenFeed, which is now the global standard for measuring ruminant emissions in production-based settings. Our company is headquartered in Rapid City, South Dakota, and this is where all of our engineering, data management, manufacturing is located. And just kind of a quick update, to date, we have systems operating in over 35 countries on every continent, with the exception of Antarctica. Also want to give you just a quick overview of our business spectrum, which really includes clients from across the livestock industry, but of course, many of our customers are involved in research, and all of our systems have research applications. So as I just mentioned, our GreenFeed system, which is used for measuring metabolic gases or emissions from ruminants. We have our base SmartFeed system for measuring feed intake on a daily basis. We have a couple of our systems that we'll talk about, of course, today, our SmartFeed Pro and our Super SmartFeed, used for controlling individual animal intake. And then, of course, next week, we'll be talking about our SmartScale system for capturing animal weight, performance, and behavior at the water. Another industry sector we're working with is the Seedstock sector, using our SmartFeed to measure individual feed intake for efficiency testing. And we're also seeing some increase in interest in using our GreenFeed system for identifying genetics that would be have a lower methane emitting potential. Really, ultimately, our ambition is to see application of these technologies in the production sector. And so we'll round out today's webinar with just some food for thought in terms of identifying opportunities and really kind of the value proposition of precision intake systems for production and commercial-based operations. So let's start with just a really quick outline of the topics we're going to visit about today. We want to make sure we have a thorough opportunity to discuss the design and the function of our SmartFeed Pro and Super SmartFeed, as well as give you a quick overview of our web-based interface, and certainly have some discussion around research applications as well as the future applications of this technology. But I'd really like to just start with what I'll call the commonalities or kind of the shared features of our Seedstock technology. So regardless of what system we talk about today or even next week, there are some shared commonalities and shared features that all of our systems have. And so rather than sound repetitive today, we'll just go over these at the front end of this webinar and make sure you understand that all of our systems have these features. Really, the first shared feature is that all of our systems are wireless, they're portable, and they're modular. And so wireless really means there's no network cables, there's no central computers, etc. Each unit has an onboard computer that communicates wirelessly through either a Wi-Fi network or a cellular network, and that data is then routed through the cloud to a central server, and it's available to you 24/7 through our login user interface, which you can access from any internet connected device. Just an important note as we think about data is that our customers own the data. And so to that end, you have access to both raw as well as processed data. So really anything from raw load cell voltages all the way to finished intake reports or summaries is provided and available to you, the customer, 24/7. By being wireless, again, that means that these units are very easy to install. It also means these units can be moved or relocated very easily. And today we'll also discuss systems such as our Super SmartFeed, which really offer the ultimate in terms of portability and remote use. When you think about the word modular, that really refers to the ability of these units to stand alone, but also can be added to, or these units can be moved. Essentially, these units will be able to sync together and communicate wirelessly, very, very effortlessly. They'll be able to be synced together. We'll also mention all of our systems are powered by DC or direct current, and this enables all of our technology to be powered by solar kits. In the case where you may have close access to AC power, it's very simple to add an AC power converter and run those off of an existing AC power supply. This kind of commonalities continued in all of our systems. We use state-of-the-art RFID readers that are designed to operate in noisy environments. And these RFID readers are compatible with any low-frequency EID tag. This is a really important feature when you consider that your data collection hinges on animals being correctly identified on a very routine basis. Final thing I'll mention is that all of our technology is sold with an annual service contract, and this annual service contract acts as a full warranty for any of the components of your units. But perhaps more importantly is that it covers the data management, unit monitoring, and IT costs that our team has. So one of the key things I'd point out is that as long as service contracts are maintained, we ensure these units function properly. And there are no future upgrade costs to the hardware or software. So we won't come back to you in 3 or 5 or whatever time frame and require upgrades or additional charges to keep your units functioning. They will function just as they were shipped in the day you started using them with this annual service contract. So now that we've kind of covered some of the basic features, let's start out today's webinar talking about the SmartFeed Pro and really the unique features that it has. So the standard SmartFeed Pro unit is designed as a fence line bunk feeder and essentially has the capabilities of controlling the intake of anything that you put in the bunk for the animals to eat, assuming that feed would be, of course, palatable to the animals. Picture on the left is of a standard fence line installation of these units, whereas on the right would be an example of our SmartFeed Pro units that are adapted to a trailer with a solar power kit, really offering these units to have greater flexibility of use and portability. We'll talk more about this option later in some slides in the presentation. Next couple of slides are really designed as just kind of a walk around to point out some of the main features and kind of orient you to the SmartFeed Pro. This picture on this slide is the front view, or the side the animals don't have access to. So this would be the feed alley where the bins are lined up in the feed alley. Starting in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see kind of a description and an arrow pointing to the CPU, or really the control panel that contains a display. This is the brains of the unit, which contains all circuitry, the communications, and the control of the unit. The display also allows the user the opportunity to view the scale weights, enabling easy calibration, but really also you can toggle through the various control functions of the unit. Moving down in a clockwise direction, you'll see that we use 10-gram high-resolution load cells. That's pretty standard across all of our SmartFeed applications. And of course, those load cells are mounted to the frame of the unit. Next, if you're going to have the opportunity where you're going to locate these, that AC power would be accessible. The units would have this small gray box, which would be the AC-DC power converter. Moving toward the front of the unit, you'll notice that these SmartFeed Pros come standard with a stainless steel feed bin. And this stainless steel feed bin also allows us to incorporate a drop-down access door. That drop-down access door really allows these units to be easily accessed from the front, enables easy cleaning, and the stainless steel design allows the units to be very robust, but also be thoroughly cleaned between trials and experiments. The final two features at kind of the 11 o'clock position on this slide refer to the actual exclusion gate system that makes the SmartFeed Pro capable of controlling feed intake. We'll talk more about this system in depth in just a couple of slides. I would mention the orange little exclusion gate latch that's pointed out. That is the latch that's used to lock the gate in the full open position for training animals, but also wanted to make sure that you understood that these bunks are capable of feeding ad lib. So by engaging that lever, it locks that gate into the full open position, and you can do ad lib feeding out of these, just like with our standard SmartFeed bins or bunks. This slide shows a picture, or really the unit from the rear or the animal view perspective. And from this perspective, you can more easily see the exclusion gate. This picture, the exclusion gate is in its closed or upright position, meaning animals would be locked out of the unit. Upon an animal approaching the unit, if the animal was eligible for feed, the gate would be unlocked and the gate would be able to be pushed down by the animal and allowed access to the feed. One of the key things that I do want to point out in this slide is the range of adjustability. And so we designed these to be capable of controlling intake on a wide range of animals, anything from small ruminants, sheep and goats, all the way up to mature beef or dairy cattle. So we have the ability to move the exclusion gate system that's attached to that head stanchion up and down to accommodate all sorts of animal sizes. Also from this view, you can see that because we use these stainless steel bins, we have a throat height insert that is adjustable. That throat height adjustability ensures that regardless of animal size, the throat height can be lowered or raised, but really it's an important feature as we think about those smaller animals, being able to lower that so that those animals can reach the bottom of the bin when they're using this feeder. So now that we're just kind of familiar with the general layout of the SmartFeed Pro, let's maybe focus a little bit on the exclusion gate system. And so the exclusion gate is operated mechanically, and it has over 2,000 pounds of upward force, but yet has the ability to be adjusted to where small ruminants can open the gate with only a few pounds of downward pressure. So ultimately, this gate and its mechanical action is tied to the onboard processing unit, or the CPU. We use an algorithm to precisely control intake and operate the exclusion gate system on an individual animal basis. This means that in the case where you may have multiple SmartFeed Pro units in a single pen or pasture, the units are able to talk to each other and allowing animals access to any of the units that you have determined the animals or allowed the animals to use, and they can use any of those SmartFeed Pros until that individual animal reaches its intake allotted threshold, at which point that animal then is no longer allowed access to any of those units that it has access to. It's just the SmartFeed Pro exclusion gate, and it's probably just as easy to show a really quick video of this gate system in action. And so this video really demonstrates how an animal will gain access. It will consume feed, and then the exclusion gate will be activated and the animal will be removed from the SmartFeed Pro unit. We'll play that another time here. But it is really important as we look at this system to point out that and it's a little difficult from this video to see, but the exclusion gate system is very, very ingenious in the way that it actually follows the animal out of the bin and then locks into the closed position whenever that animal exits from that feed bin. This is really an important feature that prevents any treatment crossovers or any cheating by other more aggressive animals that may try to slip in and receive feed as an animal's leaving, or perhaps try and bully another animal out of position. If an animal leaves that bin, that gate is going to cycle to that closed position and prevent other animals from accessing that feed stuff. I want to spend just a minute here talking a little bit about training animals to use the SmartFeed Pro, and really training is pretty straightforward. Would need to start by adjusting the gate system and really the head stanchion, as well as the bin throat height to the appropriate level for the animals that we're planning to use. From there, we would set the gate into that fully open or ad lib position, allowing the animals easy access to that feed bin. In a dry lot setting, animals are going to learn really quickly that this is really their only source of feed, and they're going to learn to use that that feed bin very, very easily. In a pasture setting where there's other forage available, other opportunities for intake, it may take a little bit longer. So if you're planning to use this system in a pasture-based setting and you want to shorten that training time, it's probably advisable to maybe do some pre-training of these animals in a more dry lot setting to expedite this process. The next step is really to monitor animal usage. And once we see that the animals are consistently using the system, we could then engage the exclusion gate and set the limits for the animal's intake. For experimental purposes, the training length is going to vary. Each animal can access any of the units in the pen, if animals are able to access any of the units in the pen, adaptation is typically pretty quick. But in other scenarios where maybe animals are going to have to use one or just a couple of the available units in the pen containing an experimental diet, we're probably going to require some additional days of training and some time spent with those animals. An important note at this point is to observe, after we get those animals on feed and using the system, making sure that the stanchion height, everything is set correctly. If those gates are set too high, we may have issues for some of those smaller animals in a research setting being able to open or put their head over that gate and open the exclusion gate. As I mentioned earlier, the SmartFeed Pros are designed as a fence line bunk feeding system, and the bunks themselves are self-contained. They're capable of being moved or relocated to different locations. But did want to point out that we do have the ability to adapt these units to trailers with solar. And this really adds the ease of transportation, but also use in remote locations or pasture and range-based types of applications. Pictures in this slide show the options for mounting either a 2 or 4 SmartFeed Pros in a self-contained trailer. And so the primary advantage of using this type of setup for pasture-based feeding is that it would allow a very wide range of feedstuffs to be fed. And so we've had everything from concentrates, TMRs, to minerals, all the way to lick tubs that were used in this type of arrangement. Really, the primary downside of these trailer-mounted systems is that they're more difficult to refill. You're not going to be able to simply drive by with a feed truck like you can when they're mounted in a fence line configuration and refill these. But that kind of will lead us to really our next topic, which is our super smart feed system, which is really designed very nicely to accommodate pasture and range-based feeding scenarios. We'll take just another opportunity here to give you guys an opportunity to engage. And we're going to ask you just another poll question. Looks like Mike has engaged the poll. And so this question asks, are you currently involved or plan to be involved in the next 1 to 2 years with research that would require control of intake? Give you guys a minute or two or a second or two here to submit your answers. Appreciate your input.
All right, with 60% of the audience voted, the results are 70% of them say yes, 2% say no, and 28% say possibly.
Great. Well, that's great to hear. We have a number of folks working in the areas of controlling intake here, and certainly some folks who are considering it. And we appreciate your input on that question and that poll as well. So let's transition to talk about our other system here called the Super Smart Feed, which really is innovative. And it's designed to control feed intake really where no one else does it. And that's it's designed specifically to go out onto pasture and range and control feed intake. And with that focus on livestock system efficiency, but also research, we designed this system again to precisely deliver feed on an individual basis. These units are designed to run completely autonomously for long periods of time. So they feature a central feed hopper. And so that feed bin will show you a little bit better picture of that here in just a moment. It's about 120 cubic feet or 3.4 cubic meters. So depending on your feed density, it should hold somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 tons of feed. Up around that central feed bin are 4 individual feed openings. May also refer to them as feed stations. Each station is equipped with an RFID reader to recognize each animal. We also use a head position sensor, which allows us to ensure that that animal's head is in the correct position before we start to dispense feed. And then we use a stainless steel conveyor system with an individual variable speed motor at each of these feed stations that dispenses the feed to the animals. These units were really designed with portability, towability, and remote use in mind. So they come standard with a highway towable chassis. We mentioned that it's highway towable, but probably don't really recommend towing necessarily at highway speeds, and we certainly don't recommend towing it when it's full of feed. But they do come standard with that highway towable chassis, as well as a solar power kit and the cellular modem for wireless connection. Kind of like we did with the SmartFeed Pro, just take a minute to familiarize you with some of the features of the Super SmartFeed. And so again, kind of starting in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that we do offer or have as standard the solar panel. And this solar panel system is mounted to an adjustable frame. And that adjustable frame really allows it to lay flat whenever it's being towed. But it also allows that solar panel to be set to the correct angle for the time of year. So that's really an important part of optimizing the solar power system. So kind of during the winter, if you're in the northern hemisphere, this unit will of course be aimed south, and with that panel fairly close to vertical. But then in the summer, we would actually orient or lay that panel more close to horizontal. The second caption really illustrates the red portion. And so anything that you see in that picture that's red would be the bulk feed bin. And this bin is on load cells, which allows the user to know exactly how much feed is available in the hopper at all times. We'll have a close-up of that in a future slide here and talk about the options related to the feed bin. Next thing to point out is that these units include alleyway gates, and these alleyway gates are attached to the unit, but they're designed to be able to be folded up, and in that folded up or transport position, the animals can be trained to the units. After those animals are trained, we would lower them to kind of the position that they're in this picture, and we'd be able to adjust the width of those gates to accommodate the animal size so that only one animal can access the feed dish or the feed opening at a time, preventing other animals from butting animals out of the way, or those more aggressive animals from pushing around on animals while they're trying to eat. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we cover training animals. Although it's just a little tricky to see, we do have the trailer hitch. It's positioned between the 2 alleyways on the front of the unit. And then you can see the position of the feed dish and the feed openings, as well as the head position sensor at the front 2 openings. And so there would be a matching 2 matching 2 feed openings on the rear of this unit from a different view. Here we're really looking down into the feed hopper, and actually in this unit we've subdivided the hopper into 4 different quadrants. And so this allows up to 4 different feeds to be dispensed at one time, which is a really great feature for testing differing feedstuffs, ingredients, feed additives, etc. Again, on pasture. At the very bottom of the hopper, you can see there's kind of some little stainless steel bars. That is our stainless steel feed conveyor. And then also the white feed adjustment gate, and that is used to help calibrate that machine. And again, just to mention there, each feed opening has its own individual conveyor system powered by an individual variable speed motor, to where we can dispense feed very accurately across this unit with various feedstuffs. So let's just kind of run through how we control feed intake with the Super SmartFeed. And again, each unit has these 4 individual feed openings, each with RFID readers. So when feeding a common diet, animals can go to any of these 4 feed stations and receive feed. Of course, When we subdivide the hopper, say into quadrants, and want to feed multiple diets, the animals on each treatment will have to learn which feed station they'll need to go to. At each feed station, there is a separate feed conveyor, as we just mentioned. It's powered by that variable speed motor. And this is a really important point, because make sure that you understand that if we program an animal to receive 2 kilograms of feed, when that animal approaches the feeder, 2 kilograms is not dropped all at once. The feed is dispensed at a rate which approximately matches the intake rate of the animal. And we have the ability to speed up or slow down this dispense rate, even to the individual animal level. And what this does is it really ensures that should an animal decide to leave prior to cleaning up its feed, little if any feed should be left in the feed dish. Just also mention the way we calibrate these units is a little different, as it's really a mechanical calibration. Basically, we would adjust that feed door opening, the little white door that is used there, and we saw a picture of as we looked into the feed hopper. So we'd adjust that feed door height. We can then measure mass of feed dispensed per motor tick. And this is the most accurate means of calibrating these units. And really, by running the units over a series of motor ticks, we're able to very precisely control the amount of feed that would be dispensed. Also, just kind of wanted to touch on the feed types that would be suitable for the Super Smart Feed, and the feed types we know we can dispense very accurately. The real key is to make sure the feeds that you plan to use have the ability to flow, but also the particle size is not too big to cause an issue with variance in the feed rate and really the calibration. So basically, any dry grains, pellets, many concentrated feed mixes, most of our dry byproduct or co-product types of feeds, such as distillers, corn, gluten, wheat midds, soy hulls, should all work and flow very well through this system. I'll just also mention that some of our lower density feedstuffs, such as perhaps some of our cotton, citrus, or sugarcane byproducts, we can also work with these, but many times they may require the addition of a feed agitator, which we have as an available option with this system. And that feed agitator will just help reduce the bridging in that feed hopper that might occur with some of these feeds. So really, the feeds that we don't recommend boil down to those wet feeds, such as silages, maybe some TMRs that contain silages, as well as any of the wet byproduct feeds, such as wet or modified wet distillers. And definitely these units are not designed to dispense hay. Did want to visit for a minute again about training using our Super Smart Feed system. And the reality is the Super Smart Feed is an automated piece of equipment. And this equipment is going to make some sounds, and certainly animals with little exposure to automated equipment or creep feeders or self-feeders. And I'll just mention feed in general. If animals haven't been trained to consume feed, are really going to require some additional training and acclimation to this system. Kind of first and foremost, we would encourage you to think about where you can train the animals for the highest success and shortest training period. A small pasture, a grass trap, or a dry lot would be really ideal candidates for locating this unit for training purposes. Using larger pastures can work. However, we'd recommend thinking about where you can place that unit, where those animals are going to be most likely to congregate. Maybe areas that would be around the shade or the water sources, maybe the existing feed bunks where those animals tend to congregate. We encourage you to think about using really palatable feed. So think about this training period much like creep feeding calves. So we want that feed to be very palatable. We want it, of course, to be fresh. And so that'll allow for much faster use and adaptation. Encourage you to reserve those research treatment diets. You know, if we're a little uncertain about the palatability of a given research treatment diet, probably reserve that for post-training of these animals if there's any question about the palatability. After we've decided where we want to train the animals and determined a palatable feed, and of course we calibrated the unit based on this type of feed that we're going to use, We want to make sure and we raise those alleyway gates to encourage the animals to use the system and not feel confined. So from there, the next step is just going to be to monitor animal use. And we're going to be looking for consecutive days of individual animal use of the system. This is a good time to just kind of point out that there are going to be animals that are very timid and animals that for whatever reason may be very slow to adapt to and use the super smart feed. And so in fact, there may be animals that simply won't use it. So kind of from an experimental or research perspective, these may be animals that need to be sorted from the group, or conversely, maybe the dominant animals that have learned to use the system can be sorted, allowing those more timid animals a better opportunity to use the super smart feed and really become acclimated to feeding from it. Either way, really monitoring is going to be required and sorting is going to be a possibility, depending upon the time frame you have for training those animals. Final step in terms of training these animals will be to lower and adjust the alleyway gates. These gates have about 12 inches of horizontal width adjustment. So the idea is to adjust the gate width so that one animal can comfortably be at the feeder at a time, really without rubbing his ribs or feeling restricted while he's at the feed opening receiving feed. But at the same time, we don't want that width to be too wide to where it could possibly permit two animals from being side by side in that alleyway. Again, monitoring and really adjusting intakes will be required at this stage, as well as acclimation again to those treatment diets if they're going to be different from the training diet. So as we kind of talk a little bit about monitoring and control of the system, we did want to go through and just give you a brief snapshot of our login user interface. So as we think about monitoring the system, controlling intake, this would be the login page that you would access to enter your username and password. And so from there, once that's done, you should be able to see a screen as you log in that looks kind of like this. And so just to kind of point out in that upper right-hand corner, there's a red circle. You would be underneath the SmartFeed tab. In this tab, it's going to provide you with just kind of the basic information about all of the units that are under your login. So you'll be able to see some information related to the mass in your feeders, the battery voltages, etc. If you scroll down on this screen, you're going to find a section kind of on some of the configuration options that there might be, including settings for calibration, feed quota time resets, and then some of the email alert settings that are available. The next screenshot would be, again, if we look at the upper right-hand corner, this would be under the Feed and Gain tab, and then it would be looking at the animal statistics. So the highlighted or circled animal statistics tab would be the view that we're in. This is a customizable quick view of the animals you have using your feeders. The default setting that you would see when you log into this page would be the intake that those animals have had today, and then the previous 2 days worth of individual intakes. But you can simply plug in the dates you'd like to see the intakes for and click go, and that data will display with intake totals aggregated by the individual animal, as well as that average daily intake by individual. Just kind of quickly from this screen, you can quickly spot which animals are using the system. So if we're in kind of that training mode, what we're going to be looking for is the animals, again, with consecutive day intakes at the levels that we're wanting. And then you can quickly find those animals that are not using the system and those animals which are starting to use the system. The final screenshot I'll show you today is kind of my favorite. Especially from really not only a research, but a producer perspective. And this screen that you'll see is actually used to control the individual intake of these animals. In this screenshot, it's automatically set up to show you up to 4 feed types. So this example would really be related to that super smart feed where we have those 4 quadrants available to feed individual animals. So again, you'll see types 1 through 4 of that feed type. For this set of calves and this data set that you're looking at, I was training them to use a system on a single feed type, so I just defaulted their intakes at each feed opening to approximately 4.75 pounds per day. So from the screen, you can set intake on an individual basis by simply clicking on the feed amount under a feed type, or you can reset the entire group at once with a control function that's actually kind of at the bottom or lower portion of this screen. You know, I think the neat thing is, for a really quick real world example, the set of calves, if we look at this calf number 723-396, the 396 is actually the weight of this calf at the time he was put into the pasture with this feeder. And so he's about 70 pounds lighter than the average of this group. You know, from a beef producer's perspective and from a marketing perspective, there's a really good chance in a traditional feeding scenario, he's probably going to be sorted. He's very likely going to be pushed around at the feed bunk and not receive the amount of feed that we would think of or want him to receive on average. So really, the unique thing that we can do with this is I can go right out and identify that this calf is lighter and go in and decide, hey, I want this calf to gain a little bit faster. We can increase his daily feed allotment to allow a much easier opportunity for this calf to grow a little bit faster than the average of the group, and hopefully decrease his chance of being sorted to a single sale lot or something to where he would be sorted at the sale barn or just be an out sort. We can do the same thing by looking at this calf down on the lower side. So this is a calf that's kind of on, he's about 75 pounds heavier than the average. And so if we wanted to, we could decrease his feed intake by just a little bit, potentially kind of slow his rate of gain and make sure we are able to uniformly develop this set of cattle to our marketing endpoint. So we're going to transition now to just spend a little time on research and the applications for research. And again, we're going to wrap up today with just some thought towards the future of precision feed intake. First thing I'd really kind of like to do is make sure we give credit to the researchers who have used our systems, several of which I'm sure it sounds like are on today's webinar. So we greatly appreciate your work and the team efforts that you've had the opportunity to work with us and use our systems for research. I do want to point out that we try to really keep a very current list of publications on our website. We'll mention that if you ever see something that's missing, please let us know. We greatly appreciate hearing from any of our clients and making sure we're keeping up to date with their research applications and publications. So just I'll quickly orient you to our publications list, which can be found on our website at seedlockinc.com. When you get to our page, you'll see that we have it organized by whether you're a researcher or a producer. In this case, if you'll select the researcher and then select publications, you'll come to a page that looks kind of like this. We have a very lengthy publication list. Many of those publications are featuring research from our green feed system, which has been around for nearly a decade and has generated a lot of publications. The thing we've done is we've broken out our publications list by interest. So if you click SmartFeed publications, you'll be directed right to our list of publications related to our SmartFeed systems. So I thought, as we thought about research applications, I just highlight one of the studies that's listed in our publications list. And this study, I think, really exemplifies the capabilities of our SmartFeed systems for controlling feed intake on an individual basis. So the study was completed by Casey McCarthy and co-workers at North Dakota State University. It was published in the December 2019 supplement of Translational Animal Science. And what it did was it really evaluated the SmartFeed Pro's ability to measure and control intake on range. And so just kind of the materials and methods here, the study used a single 70-hectare pasture, employed 60 heifers in this experiment across 3 different treatments over a 57-day period. And then the SmartFeed systems that they used were the 2 trailer systems that each had 2 of the SmartFeed Pro units that were mounted in those trailers. But really, to kind of think the implications portion of this this research paper is really the most important part. And I'll just kind of read that real quick. And it says the SmartFeed units were able to control intake of individual animals assigned to different treatment groups in a group pasture scenario. Our results clearly show that the feed controlling portion of the SmartFeed units can be used for precision feeding of individuals in expansive group managed scenarios. So again, I think that's a pretty powerful implication statement, and just kind of wanted to walk you through an illustration, really kind of a visual of maybe how we would line up or use some pasture range-based supplementation in a traditional manner. So traditionally, this would involve multiple replications of treatments across experimental pastures and group feeding each of these replications an experimental diet. And then we'd summarize those group intakes and using each pasture as the experimental unit. Of course, this requires several pastures to get enough replications and statistical power, and we have to ensure that the pastures are of equal size, they're of equal forage type and quantity and quality, as well as these pastures have equal access and amounts of shade and water for these animals. So this slide really illustrates a basic 3 treatment study across 9 replicated pastures with 6 head per treatment. I'm guessing there's many of you in our audience today that have access to research stations or farms where this type of arrangement is available. But I'm guessing that facilities like these are not increasing, and that even those available are still going to require significant labor as well as management to conduct studies like these. So let's just take that same concept of study, maybe even the same field or same field size, the same number of animals, but let's change our feeding system. And so now we have one experimental pasture where all animals that are on this experiment would have equal access to shade, they'd have equal access to water, grazing, forages, all things there are going to be equal. Now let's evaluate that effect, of a treatment diet using the Super Smart Feed, and this would allow many different sites to be used as experimental pastures. The other option, of course, we can show not only our Super Smart Feed, but we could also remotely use those SmartFeed Pros as well in that pasture system, perhaps linking them up to either the trailer system or using them with a solar kit. And in this scenario, if we run out of grass in this pasture, we can move that entire group to a new pasture, move the SmartFeed right along with the cattle. Again, a really unique and innovative tool for evaluating the effect of feeding without worrying about really the effect of the pasture or the effect of the forage base that those animals are on. So just kind of wanted to run through a few of the research concepts, and by no means is this an exhaustive list. I think there's still a lot of innovation and exploratory work in a lot of different areas that our controlling intake and Super Smart Feed and SmartFeed Pro systems are going to allow. So really the first one is, I think, fairly obvious, and it would involve evaluating a feed stuff that's fed at differing intake levels. The other thing we can do is we can look at different feedstuffs or diets at the same time. So, something in this part of the world where we're cool season grass based, maybe we could evaluate a starch-based supplement versus a fiber-based supplement for early spring grazing of cool season grasses. Maybe we could also look at that same example with and without the effect of a feed additive or an ionophore. Also had some work and interest around self-limited feeds. So those feeds that would have a salt limiter or other feed additive to limit feed intake, so we can measure that feed intake, we can control feed intake as a control. And then also with all of our systems, we have the ability to tease out and look at that behavior associated with the feeding of whatever type of feed stuff we're looking at. Always a lot of interest especially from an industry perspective around micronutrients, maybe mineral source and availability. There's a lot of new work involving plant extracts. Using a SmartFeed is a great way to control intake of these various minerals. But certainly, as we'll talk about next week, our standard SmartFeed is a great tool as well that can be used to measure voluntary mineral intake. Another concept would be revolving around precision creep feeding. And so this would be an area of really a tremendous area for exploration. Creep feeding studies have always been challenging, and really to some extent, creep feeding itself is just a challenging topic. As we think about ad libitum creep feeding and really the poor feed conversions that can occur, calves that become too fleshy and discounted, and then really the effects that creep feeding can have on the young heifer that's destined to be a replacement or be that cow in the herd. I think an area that's really interesting is evaluating forage-based efficiency, and another area that I think is really untapped. When we think about group feeding a set of cattle, maybe a set of bulls or replacement heifers on grass, we really have virtually no idea what each animal is actually consuming, both forage as well as the supplemental feed that we're providing to those animals. We know there's tremendous variation around individual intakes, even in a bunk feeding scenario. So by measuring individual supplemental intake and controlling individual intake, are there some new measurements around efficiency that might be able to be developed to help us give us a new look at forage base as well as that efficiency from it? Kind of a final area that we might look at would be really kind of an uncharted territory, and that would involve maybe the precision feeding related to mixed groups or mixed sexes and management groups. So this is really conceptual in nature, but you can kind of think about this in terms of, can we creep feed our steers different from our heifers? Can we develop heifers perhaps right alongside the cow herd? So scenario where we're able to pinpoint those replacement heifers and feed them a different level or supplement them different from the cow herd that they're grazing alongside. It's a management scenario where a lot of folks would like to be able to develop heifers, but they have to be able to sort and keep those animals segregated for really good replacement development programs. So just kind of want to round out today's webinar with just kind of thinking about looking toward the future. And so, a couple of things that I think as we consider agriculture in the coming years, there's a couple things we know for sure. And of course, I think we're all aware that the population is increasing, and that really available land for cultivation and for agriculture is also likely to be decreasing over the coming decades. Really, despite a growing population, what about labor availability? If you're involved with production ag today, you know how hard it is to really recruit, train, and even retain these good employees for farm and ranch work. The reality is that's probably not going to change very much in the coming years. The other thing, of course, is what about input costs? Right now, we're kind of seeing a little slump in some of our input costs, but longer term, what do you think? Feed, fertilizer, and fuel costs, I think they'll probably be on the rise and certainly not be at the levels they're at today. Kind of the final two bullet points are sort of really intertwined. And again, as we're talking about increased production being required to feed this growing population base with less land, these couple of last things are really important to consider. So really, whatever systems and technology we hone in on and decide to deploy, we've got to always have this focus, I think, around sustainability, some regard to certainly the environment, as well as how our products and how our management systems are going to be viewed by the consumer and be acceptable, especially in terms of animal care and animal well-being. Just kind of a Farm Bureau publishes information on the current numbers that our farmers are feeding. And so today, one U.S. farm feeds about 166 people annually, with the population expected to increase by 2.2 billion by 2050. That correlates to an increase of about 70% more food or more production that will be required per farmer by 2050. So how can, as we think about it, how can technology and precision feeding play a role in meeting the demands? And here at Seedstock, I think we certainly think the answer is going to be in terms of application of precision intake feeding. It's going to be in the application of technology, and certainly involve a lot of different research concepts to help drive those areas of exploration. So, can we use precise individual intake control to improve the utilization of existing grazing and forage-based resources? In other words, can we provide really the right supplement at the right time to the right animals to improve performance, improve things like carrying capacity, and certainly also improve animal health and welfare, and do this all really in an environmentally sustainable way? The other strategy really revolves around the concept of feeding to optimize individual animal performance. And so think about it, rather than feeding a pen or herd of animals, can we feed to the specific requirements of each individual animal in the pen? Perhaps those criteria we're looking at are age, maybe their size, but certainly in the future, I think we're going to learn more and more about the ability to hone in and maybe manage and feed certain genetics, maybe manage and feed to differing market outcomes as drivers for how we feed and manage individual intakes, rather than just simply managing the average of the pen. Maybe another idea around that is, can we identify specific cows within the herd that are going to require some supplement to improve reproductive efficiency? Can we use this system to pinpoint and enhance gestational nutrition? And finally, can we use these systems to deliver additives or ionophores to improve animal efficiency and health? And I think the answer to those questions is certainly we can, and we're really looking towards the future at helping the industry be able to utilize and adopt these types of systems. We want to take this last slide just to let you know, we've kind of taken a pretty big step towards making precision feeding available and affordable at the industry level, and that's with our newest version called our Producer Super Smart Feed. And this system functionally is the same as the Research Super Smart Feed model that we just visited about, really without some of the bells and whistles required for research application. But again, it's at a fraction of the cost. So this system is going to allow farmers and ranchers to deploy this technology to feed individual animals precise amounts in remote locations. And again, it's the opportunity to really feed and manage animals from your smartphone or smart device. We believe this is going to present a tremendous opportunity for farmers and ranchers to save labor, again, optimize supplemental feeding and animal performance, and improve animal health in a sustainable and profitable way. So we'll kind of round things out. One final poll question for today's program: what will be the major driver for adoption of precision feeding technology in the beef and dairy industry? So again, appreciate your input for this final poll of the day. Mike, are you seeing the results of the poll?
Yep, they're still coming in. We're at 51% voted. And all right, here are the results. 41% say that it's optimized individual animal performance. 24% say improved forage resource utilization. 20% say ability to save labor and feed animals on range and pasture remotely. And 15% say increased ability to manage animal health and welfare.
Great. So it sounds like a lot of interest, perhaps, or thoughts around the idea to optimize individual animal performance, but certainly interest in those other areas related to forage resource utilization and labor and things like that. So appreciate it, guys. That is wraps up today's webinar, but certainly we have time for questions. And again, if you would, just make sure those questions are entered into the chat section of the webinar screen, or feel free to email us at any time with any questions, or if you'd like more information, just let us know by contacting us at contact@seedlockinc.com. So,
Ted, good job. This is Scott Zimmerman. I had one quick point before everyone leaves. That grant application, we have extended the deadline to submitting it to June 26th. It was mentioned an earlier date, but we last week we decided to extend that date to June 26th for the due date of the application. Thank you, Ted.
you bet. Perfect. Thank you for updating us on that that deadline.
Okay, Ted. So we have looks like 5 questions right now, but they might still come in. First question is, does the exclusion gate actually push the animal out or just lock once the animal finishes?
Yeah, great question. So does the exclusion gate actually push or force that animal out? And the answer to that is yes. So when that animal, if we have an animal programmed to receive, I don't know, 5 kilograms of feed, when that animal actually hits that 5 kilogram level or that threshold of feed intake, that exclusion gate system will actually come up and forcibly push that animal out of that feed bin, and then not allow that animal to come back and receive additional feed for the predetermined amount of time. Typically that's set up for a 24-hour period, but certainly we have the ability to also do some functionality around that time frame as well. Good question.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question, what is the rationale for controlling the intake? Economical research or economical or research purposes?
So the rationale behind controlling intake, I think it's, if you go back and you look at opportunities to limit feed and improve efficiency, there's been a lot of data around that. And so certainly from a research perspective, and a feeding perspective, opportunities to precisely control feed intake from a pure management strategy has been one that holds a lot of potential for future applications. From a research perspective, I think the ability, to nicely be able to control feed intake to that individual level really allows us to research and explore those feed additives, differing feed levels, really across a multiple range of environments, anywhere from a dry lot or a feed yard type scenario, all the way out to those supplemental feed in levels and different types of supplemental feed out on a pasture or forage base. So, and then again, as we think about kind of that last polling question, from perhaps the real world side of things is that opportunity to optimize individual animal intake, again, driving individual performance in intake levels based off of the individual animal rather than just kind of a herd or a average for animals. So yeah, I think there's really applications, both research as well as out in the industry sectors of the beef and dairy industry. Good question as well.
Thanks for elaborating on that. Next question is, if the animal's daily concentrate ration is 3 kilograms, does this system allow that animal not to take more than 3 kilograms per day? If so, does the system identify the particular animal by its ear tag?
Yeah, so in either of these systems, the SmartFeed Pro, which would control intake using the exclusion gate, or in the Super SmartFeed, where that animal would go to a feed opening and that feed would be dispensed, we can set that intake level to that individual animal. So again, yeah, 3 kilograms using the SmartFeed Pro. Once they hit 3 kilograms of intake for that daily allotment of feed, the exclusion gate would come up and it would force that animal out. If there were multiple SmartFeed Pro units in that pen or in that pasture, that animal can't access any of them. Again, those units will talk to each other, and once that animal reaches its threshold of intake, it's not going to be able to receive feed from any of those units. In that Super SmartFeed scenario out on pasture, exactly the same, only instead of a gate system, When that animal approaches that feeder and it dispenses that feed, once that animal has received its 3 kilograms worth of feed that's been dispensed, that's all it's going to receive for that daily period. And that animal can come and go to that feeder as many times as it likes throughout the day to receive that amount of feed. But once it hits that threshold that you've set up, whether it's 3 kilograms or 8 kilograms or 20 kilograms, once it receives that amount of feed, it will not dispense more feed to that animal during that 24-hour period.
Okay.
So, yeah, great question there as well. Make sure we're all clear on how those systems control intake.
The next question is, are the units remotely monitored by Seedstock staff?
Yes, they are. And so, you know, we basically have the ability to monitor and provide assistance with monitoring and control. We have a series of different automated alerts that constantly watch your systems to alert both us as well as you if there would be an issue. But most definitely, we're very much as part of that service contract agreement. A big role of that service contract is the monitoring and really kind of backside the data management to help and assist you in making sure that those systems work and function properly at all times for you.
All right, next question, and this is kind of a subjective answer. Can you give any indication of how many cattle can be comfortably monitored using the SmartFeed Pro unit?
Well, that's a great question. And so that question, let me just start by saying from an ad libitum or free choice feeding perspective with our SmartFeed system, you know, kind of that ball or that really sweet spot would be around 7 animals. If we're talking about growing animals, 7 animals per feed opening or per SmartFeed system. And so if we can kind of apply that same general rule to our SmartFeed Pro or Super SmartFeed. So if we were full feeding animals, we would recommend somewhere probably in the neighborhood, if these were growing animals, about 7 animals per feed opening. So from there, when we talk about controlling feed intake, it's kind of some areas of uncharted waters. We know with our Super SmartFeed, the big red feeder, that we can confidently say that at an intake level of about 2 pounds per head per day, that unit will comfortably feed 100 animals. So that's kind of the going from an ad lib perspective of 7 all the way to a restricted intake or controlled intake of 2 pounds per day, all the way to 25 animals per feed opening. So from there, there's kind of some gray areas in between, and some of that may depend upon age and size of those animals, but certainly intake level is going to be the main driver. So if we're down around 3 or 4 pounds of intake, you know, most definitely probably we can run 20 animals pretty comfortably to that each individual feed opening. If we're talking about 2% of body weight or those levels that approach or get closer to an ad libitum feeding scenario, we're probably going to be down around 7 to 12 animals per feed opening. So again, it's kind of one of those questions, a great question, and it really is going to depend upon the level of control of feed intake you're going to have across those animals.
All right, thanks for that. Next question, and we've gotten a whole lot more since we started Q&A, so sorry about that 5 question. All right, if we have a hopper that's divided into 4 sections but have the same feed in all 4, can an animal use any feeder? Does the feed intake allotment allow for that animal per feeding station or per total?
So yeah, if you have a super smart feed that has the quadrants that are divided, or the bin that would be divided into quadrants so that we could possibly feed 4 different feedstuffs. But if you put the same feedstuff into each of those quadrants, absolutely an animal can go to any of those 4 feed openings to receive that feed. And so the aggregated total would be that animal could go to perhaps feed opening number 1 and receive 30% of his daily intake, then feed opening number 4 and receive the balance of that feed intake. And that would be aggregated across that system and communicated across that system to where once that animal reaches its intake threshold, it won't be able to go to any of those feed openings. Again, as you think about going to those multiple quadrants where we would have multiple feed types from a research perspective, if we had 4 different feed types being dispensed through that super smart feed, there would be 1 treatment diet dispensed at each opening. So if we ran 80 calves to that feeder and had 4 treatment groups of 20 calves, those 20 calves for each treatment will have to be trained to know to receive their treatment diet from a particular opening. So I hope that kind of makes sense. If you're using a common diet, they can go anywhere. The only time they kind of have to be trained to go to a particular opening will be whenever we're dispensing those multiple diets, and they have to learn which opening is actually the one that they have to go to get the feed to dispense. Good question.
Good answer. All right, next question. Somebody's interested in the grant and they want to know, are there multiple grants available or just 1?
I can probably answer that. Perhaps Scott can clarify that as well. My understanding is we've kind of got a targeted dollar number of 100,000 in terms of our equipment grant allowance, and so we will work through those applications, and if there is the opportunity to select several different proposals that would aggregate to $100,000, we'll certainly evaluate those proposals and have potentially multiple opportunities to award equipment to multiple individuals. So no, I don't believe, to my knowledge, will be a single winner from this grant opportunity.
Ted, this is Scott. To clear that up, like Ted mentioned, the total amount is 100,000 in any proposal of equipment, and we're looking at to award between 3 and 10 proposals. So once we get the proposals in, we'll look at the amount in aggregate and definitely select more than 1, multiple, but we haven't committed on a number of proposals at this time, except somewhere between at least 3.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott.
All right. Thanks for that clarification. Next question is, what are the main differences between the producer version of the Super Smart Feed and the regular Super Smart Feed when compared to the research version?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so the differences between the research and the producer version, again, a lot of it boils down to really that research model is designed to be exceptionally precise. And we have that ability with that research model, as we talked about. It has a stainless steel conveyor system at each feed opening with a variable speed motor. And so we can, and the other thing we didn't talk about a lot, but again, it incorporates at each feed opening a feed dish that actually is on a set of load cells, a head position sensor that really nicely ensures that not only have we recognized the animal through its RFID, but also that animal's head is in the correct position and basically indicating that animal's ready to receive feed. And so, with that research model, we're very, very precisely able to control feed intake on that individual level basis with a pretty nice resolution for that individual animal. So contrast that to the producer version. And so the very first thing I'll mention is that the drive or the feed dispensing mechanism is not a conveyor system. And so it is actually a central auger system that has 4 individual feed doors at each feed station. And so those doors are actually what is going to open and allow the feed to be dispensed. We have the ability to control the speed of those augers But again, we don't have that exceptional control down to the individual basis. Just kind of the other, of course, consideration becomes we remove those head position sensors. The only load cell with that producer is underneath the entire feed hopper. We don't have load cells at each feed dish, no head position sensors, and no ability with that producer system to subdivide quadrants at this time and make multiple feeds flow through that thing for different animals. So something we're kind of exploring, but those are the kind of the key differences in terms of functionality and what makes those two systems different in terms of their application and certainly different in terms of their price as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question, can different feeding stations on the Super SmartFeed be used in different manners? For example, can we use 2 on one side to train and 2 on the other side to measure feed intake if it's sitting in a fence line?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I mean, so if we put that Super SmartFeed, and that's something I've kind of thought about as well, as applications where we would be able to align that into a fence line and basically kind of feed one group of animals on say the east side and then a different group of animals on the west side. And so most definitely you could configure that to where 2 of those openings into one pasture are ad lib feeding or controlling intake for a group of calves or whatever, and then the other side is being used to maybe train the next set of calves, or maybe even just a completely different project that those other 2 openings are being used for on the other side of the fence. Yeah, great question, and certainly a very, very good possibility and opportunity to use it in that regard. Great question.
All right, we've got just a comment from a person that has several SmartFeed units. The exclusion gate is very robust. Animals will lean on them. The whole head catch must be set high enough to prevent animals from reaching over the gate, which we actually do go over during training.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, and we appreciate that. And yeah, I think making sure you get those that exclusion gate set correctly, and actually even in the little short video clip that we showed, you can kind of see how easily that animal was able to reach its head over that exclusion gate and open it up. And so if you have various animal sizes in that same pen, there might be an animal that can somehow try and reach over the top of that exclusion gate and be able to access a little bit of feed. But most definitely kind of adjusting those exclusion gates heights, it will be very important for correct operation. Thank you for that comment, and thank you for joining us today here on the webinar today.
All right, we do have a couple more questions. You mentioned that it they're talking about Super SmartFeed here. You mentioned that it dispenses the feed to match the animal's intake rate. Does this system record information such as intake rate, time at the bunk, time spent eating, feeding behavior, etc.?
So yeah, absolutely. We can it basically, when that animal steps in to eat, it date stamps, time stamps when that animal approaches. Absolutely, the time spent eating, and we're not going to be able, with our SmartFeed Pro, we can measure that intake rate very, very nicely, and so mass disappearance over time. Because our Super SmartFeed is kind of mechanically calibrated, I'd have to maybe double check that with Scott to see if intake rate, we can certainly measure that. That's something I'm probably, that exact metric or measurement would be something I'm not as familiar with using our Super SmartFeed, but absolutely all that behavior related to the animal, time spent at the feeder, when that animal went to the feeder and used it, all of those things would be captured and available.
With the Super SmartFeed, the goal is to set the dispensing rate a little slower than they eat, or somewhat slower. So we know the speed at which we've set the unit at for feeding, and then the animals are going to eat, at that speed. So The difference between the Pro is we're actually allowing them to eat at their own rate, and the Super is we're dispensing at a set speed that's probably slower than they would have eaten the feed normally in the SmartFeed Pro, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for clarification on this. I was trying to pull that out in terms of explaining that, but yeah, that is correct. So we kind of would alter that feed rate with the super small SmartFeed.
All right, we just have a couple more feedback comments. One person that uses SmartFeed bins says, feeding cows ad lib hay with our big bins was about 3 to 4 cows per feeder due to the time they spent eating.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean that's a great comment, and certainly as we think about the capacity of these SmartFeed systems, again, that 7 animals, kind of for those growing animals, would be kind of the sweet spot. Kind of assuming an average type of diet, a TMR that those animals can eat. Functionally, those larger, more mature animals with higher intake levels and then really low density feedstuff such as hay becomes a real function of allowing plenty of time of access to those feedstuffs. And so, yeah, most definitely with cows, dairy cattle that are high producing, is certainly we would take that capacity or that carrying rate of each individual feeder down to that 2 to 4 range, depending upon the situation. But great comment. Thank you for kind of pointing that out. Absolutely.
And that would be ad lib intake of feeding their entire diet through the feeder. But I agree with that too. Typically, just like Ted mentioned, with the larger cattle that have higher intake rates, or say on a feed stuff where they eat more slowly, and if they're getting the majority or almost all of their diet through the SmartFeed, that definitely can affect the number of animals per opening.
All right, and one more comment from the same person, actually. I've got a paper under review about feeder competition on the Super. It should be out in a month or 2. What Ted said is pretty accurate regarding competition.
Perfect. I assume that's probably in relation to kind of the 2-pound supplement rate and the approximate stocking rate, or where we know we're comfortable around 100 animals or 25 animals per opening using our super SmartFeed. So thank you for that comment, and appreciate your work around the behavior aspects, and look forward to seeing that article published.
And it looks like that's all we have for questions.
Perfect. Guys, we thank you very much for joining us today. If you have other questions or would like some more information, again, feel free to contact us at contact@seedlockinc.com. Again, please join us next Wednesday, May 20th at 9 Central. We'll be talking about our SmartFeed and SmartScale systems. And also, again, don't forget about our equipment grant opportunity. Feel free to contact us if you have other questions or need more details about that opportunity as well. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate your attention, and feel free to contact us if you need anything. Have a great day. Thanks.